Etruscan deity, Suri, whose name is thought to mean black or the black, was an ancient Chthonic god who was venerated in Etruria and central Italy. Some locations would even bear his name, such as Surina, Viterbo and Mount Soratte. Originally an Etruscan deity, Suri would later be adopted into ancient Roman religion, where the god's name would be Latinized as Soranus. According to the Etruscan National Museum, who refer to Suri as a member of the Isa, the Etruscan word for the gods, and call him the Black Lord, quote, Suri was an underworld deity who the Greeks and Romans likened to a Chthonic Apollo, end quote. In cult inscriptions, the deity is also given other names such as Wrath and Manth, and by the 4th century BC, inscriptions using Etruscan phonics appear dedicated to Aplu or Apollo. Like Apollo, the cult practices pertaining to the worship of the deity, which were carried out at the coastal sanctuary of Purgi, modern-day Santa Severa, indicate he was a god associated with oracular prophecy. In the sanctuary, Suri was venerated alongside his consort Kavatha Persephone, which seemingly confirms his assimilation with the Greek god of the underworld, Hades. Suri was associated with fire and volcanoes, as well as the sun and light. And his sacred animals were said to be wolves and goats. This can be seen in the cult practices, which we will look at in more detail shortly. Offerings of lead, arrowheads and javelins have been found made to Suri, and the deity was consulted on future events via a divining method called the Sors, which is Latinized as sortes. The National Etruscan Museum of Villa Giulia, Rome, holds one such piece and describes the Sors as, quote, a device used to question divine will. Usually a series of identical tokens etched with some favourable and some unfavourable inscriptions. They were inserted into a container and taken out either one at a time or all dropped out at once where their disposition was interpreted, end quote. The Aeneid, written by the Roman poet Virgil between 29 and 19 BC, tells us the origin story of the city of Mantua, which is situated in the present-day region of Lombardy, northern Italy. According to Virgil, the city was founded by Ocnus, the son of a prophetic nymph named Manto. Ocnus is described as first giving the city its ramparts as well as his mother's name. Quote, he too calls the train from his native coasts, Ocnus, son of prophetic Manto, and the river of Tuscany, who gave thee, O Mantua, ramparts and his mother's name. Mantua, rich in ancestry, yet not all of one blood, a threefold race, and under each race 4 cantons. Herself, she is the canton's head, and her strength is of Tuscan blood. End quote. Servius, however, the Latin grammarian of the 4th century AD, while commenting on Virgil's Aeneid, tells us that the city name of Mantua, and therefore also the name of Manto, was ultimately derived from Mantu, which was an epithet of Suri, who he describes as the Etruscan Pluto. Mantu would later be Latinized as Mantus. In Pliny's Natural History, we are told Mantua was the birthplace of Virgil, and Pliny describes how Virgil alludes to the city's Etruscan origin. In this text, Pliny also tells us how Manto was a daughter of Tiresias, who is also described elsewhere as a prophet of Apollo. Quote, Mantua was not a place of importance, but was famous for being the birthplace of Virgil. At least the poet who was born at the village of Andes in its vicinity regarded it as such. It is said to have had its name from Manto, the daughter of Tiresias. Virgil in the Aeneid alludes to its supposed Tuscan origin. End quote. The name Manto seems to bear some similarity to the Greek word mantis, which means a diviner, seer or prophet, and is used to describe prophets such as Calchas, a priest of Apollo, who is mentioned in the Iliad. The LSJ Greek lexicon shows that the word mantis is connected to the word sibula or Cybele, and is used of Apollo and Cassandra, as well as Dionysus and the Pythian priestess. The consort of Mantus was said to be a deity named Mene or Mania, who is described as a Chthonic or underworld goddess to whom sacrifices were said to be offered at festivals such as the Compitalia. Mania is sometimes described as the mother of the Manes or Lares, who are sometimes described as the deified souls of the departed. The Manes are described as being connected to places of burial, while the Lares were said to be divinities which presided over the private house and hearth, as well as fulfilling roles as the protective spirits of cities. Both the Manes and Lares seem to be somewhat analogous to the Greek daimons, which were seen as lower divinities which were inferior to that of the gods, and were said to be powers who govern an individual's destiny or lot. Daimons are also sometimes described as the departed souls of heroes which acted as tutelar deities, or the personified genius of a person or family. The goddess Mania is sometimes depicted as a naked, winged deity, wearing only boots and a pileus, which was a brimless felt cap, which was worn by the ancient Etruscans, Greeks, and Illyrians. Later, the cap would be introduced to ancient Rome. Sometimes Mania is also depicted holding a slingshot, which can be seen on some examples of Etruscan mirrors which have been recovered during archaeological digs. In Tuscan folklore, we find Mania preserved as Mania della Notte, or Mania of the Night. Here is what Charles Leyland has to say on Mania in his book, Etruscan Roman Remains in Popular Tradition. In this particular passage, he is citing Ottfried Müller, who was a 19th century professor of classical studies. Quote, "The real god of the world below among the Tuscans or Tusker," writes Ottfried Müller, "was called Mantus, who was therefore compared with Dis Pater. In Etruscan histories, the name of Mantua was derived from him. With him was worshipped a goddess of the lower realms, the Mania. This was a truly Etruscan divinity. To the strange and terrible gods to whom the Tuscan libri fatales gave human sacrifices belong Mantus and Mania. Terrible to the old Italians seemed Mania, who is inseparable from the Tuscan faith of the Lares, being allied to the Manes. She was an awful divinity to whom, under Tarquinius Superbus, boys were offered. Her fearful image, afterwards a child's toy, was in early times hung on doors to avert contamination. This Mania was the mother or grandmother of the Manes, also the mother of the Lares. Muller indulges in much speculation as to this Chthonic goddess or deity of darkness. And she still lives in Tuscany, and is called Mania della Notte, or Mania of the Night, but regarded simply as the nightmare and succuba, and as a mysterious nocturnal spirit inspiring wanton dreams. End quote. The Greeks also had a group of daimons which were called the Mania, who are described as the personified spirits of madness and frenzy, and held a sanctuary in Arcadia. The Greek geographer Pausanias, writing in the 2nd century AD, says he considers the Mania to be the same as the Eumenides or Furies. Quote, "Near Megapolis in Arcadia is a sanctuary of goddesses. They call the goddesses themselves, as well as the district around the sanctuary, Maniae. In my view, this is a surname of the Eumenides. In fact, they say that it was here that madness overtook Orestes as punishment for shedding his mother's blood. Not far from the sanctuary is a mound of earth of no great size, surmounted by a finger made of stone. The name, indeed, of the mound is the tomb of the finger. Here it is said Orestes, on losing his wits, bit off one finger of one of his hands in his driven madness. There is also another sanctuary called Ache, meaning remedies, because in it Orestes was cured of his malady. Near to the place called Ache is another sanctuary called Lacuna, because here Orestes cut off his hair on coming to his senses. Here too is a sanctuary of the Eumenides. The story is that when these goddesses were about to put Orestes out of his mind, they appeared to him black. But when he had bitten off his finger, they seemed again to be white, and he recovered his senses at the sight. So he offered a sin offering to the black goddesses to avert their wrath, while to the white deities he sacrificed a thank offering." End quote. In Orphic literature, they are described as the daughters of Persephone and Hades, and in the Orphic hymn number 68, they are addressed as vociferous Bacchanalian Furies. Quote, "Vociferous Bacchanalian Furies, hear! Ye I invoke, dread powers whom all revere. Nightly, profound, in secret who retire. Tisiphone, Alecto, and Megara dire. Deep in a cavern merged, involved in night. Near where Styx flows impervious to the sight. Ever attendant on mysterious rites, furious and fierce, whom fate's dread law delights. Revenge and sorrows dire to you belong, hid in a savage veil, severe and strong. Terrific virgins, who forever dwell endued with various forms in deepest hell. aerial and unseen by humankind, and swiftly coursing, rapid as the mind. In vain the sun with winged refulgence bright, in vain the moon far darting milder light. Wisdom and virtue may attempt in vain, and pleasing art our transport to obtain, unless with these you readily conspire, and far avert your all-destructive ire. The boundless tribes of mortals you descry, and justly rule with right's impartial eye. Come, snaky-haired fates, many-formed divine, suppress your rage and to our rights incline. End quote. The Liddell Scott Jones Greek Lexicon, or LSJ, tells us that the word mania is related to madness, enthusiasm, inspired frenzy and passion. In the dialogues of Plato's Phaedrus, we find the term used to describe the musa or muse, where the muse is described as inspiring or entering into a state of Bacchic frenzy. In Phaedrus, Socrates discusses the nature of madness and its link to prophecy. Here he tells us that the prophetesses of Delphi and the priestesses of Dodona conferred great benefits on the Hellenic world while in this state. When discussing the word mantica, or prophecy, and its connection to manica, or madness, he tells us they were originally the same word, with the insertion of the letter tau being a later addition. Quote, "It might be so if madness were simply an evil, but there is also a madness which is a divine gift, and the source of the chiefest blessings granted to men. For prophecy is a madness. And the prophetesses at Delphi and the priestesses at Dodona, when out of their senses, have conferred great benefits on Hellas, both in public and private life. But when in their senses, few or none. And I might also tell you how the Sibyl and other inspired persons have given to many an intimation of the future, which has saved them from falling. There will be more reason in appealing to the ancient inventors of names, who would never have connected prophecy, mantica, which foretells the future and is the noblest of arts, with madness, manica, or called them both by the same name if they had deemed madness to be a disgrace or dishonour. They must have thought that there was an inspired madness which was a noble thing. For the two words, mantica and manica, are really the same, and the letter tau is only a modern and tasteless insertion. The third kind is the madness of those who are possessed by the muses, which, taking hold of a delicate and virgin soul, and their inspiring frenzy, awakens lyrical and all other numbers. With these adorning the myriad actions of ancient heroes for the instruction of posterity. But he who, having no touch of the muse's madness in his soul, comes to the door and thinks that he will get into the temple by the help of art, he, I say, and his poetry are not admitted. The sane man disappears and is nowhere when he enters into rivalry with the madman." End quote. When we look at the Greek lexicon, we are shown the word mantikos is related to oracular prophecy and the faculty of divination. The word manikos is shown as being related to madness, frenzy, and inspiration. Entry number 3 says it is used of an act causing madness, where it offers us an example of where it is used in Plutarch's Lives alongside the word pharmakon, which is described as meaning drug, potion, filter or spell, and in some instances it is also used to describe a dye or paint. This should not come as a surprise, as there are sources which describe such substances as being used in religious rites. The name of Calchas, the prophet of Apollo mentioned in Homer's Iliad, does after all have a name derived from the word kalche, which the LSJ tells us is used of murex mollusks, or even the purple dye which they produce. As well as the Etruscans, Suri was also worshipped by other ancient Italic peoples, such as the Falisci, the Carpenates and the Sabines. But the main cult centre of worship was located at Mount Soratte. Mount Soratte is a narrow, isolated limestone ridge, which is made up of 6 peaks, spanning a length of just under 6 kilometres. It is the sole noticeable ridge in the Tiber Valley and is located just 28 miles north of Rome. In antiquity, the ridge was seen as sacred, probably due to its unique geological features, which include deep caves, caverns, as well as secondary volcanic phenomena, which would seemingly become associated with the divinities of the Underworld. The Sabine priests, who worshipped Suri under the name Soranus, called themselves the Hirpi Sorani, which meant wolves of Soranus, from the Sabine word for wolf, Hirpus. Servius tells us the origin story of the Hirpi Sorani in his commentary on Virgil's Aeneid. Quote, Mount Soratte is located in the territory of the Hirpini, next to Via Flaminia. It was on this mountain that a sacrifice to Dispater was once performed, because it was devoted to Chthonic deities. As wolves suddenly appeared and plundered the entrails from the fire, the shepherds chased the wolves for a long time, until they arrived at a cave emanating pestilent gases that killed people standing nearby. The reason for the emergence of this plague was that they had chased the wolves. They received a message that they could calm it down by imitating wolves. They did so, and since then, these people have been called Hirpi Sorani. End quote. Strabo, Soranus, and Pliny the Elder tell us how the priests, during their rituals, would walk barefoot across embers 3 times while carrying offerings to the deity. The priests were seemingly impervious to the heat or pain, and are even described by the Latin word exultant in the account from Soranus. Notice the use of the term mystery. Quote, it is worth remembering, and is known by everyone, that there are few families in the Faliscan territory that are called Hirpi. They perform a yearly sacrifice to Apollo on Mount Soratte. While performing their religious acts, they jump unscathed in flaming piles of wood in honour of the divinity which controls the flames. Because of their devotion to the mystery, the Senate has generously honoured the Hirpi with perpetual exemption from all official duties. End quote. Varro, transmitted by Servius, explains the priests used a medicated ointment to moisturised the bottom of their feet, while Silius Italicus says it was a trance which protected the priests. Could this medicated ointment have been infused with the hallucinogenic properties of a plant such as henbane, which brought on the trance and provided analgesic effects? Its use is documented by classical authors such as Pliny and Dioscorides, the former calling it herba Apollinaris, meaning herb of Apollo, and the latter writing that it caused sedation and served as an analgesic. The 16th century herbalist John Gerard specifically writes that washing the feet in a henbane decoction would induce sleep, and some scholars have suggested the plant may have been used in conjunction with other substances to induce oracular prophecy during rites in antiquity. The wolf and the cave also seem to be significant elements of the cult's practice, and some scholars speculate they could be symbols of the underworld, with caves serving as places of chthonic worship. To further this notion, Etruscan urns have been found depicting a wolf or a man with a wolf's head emerging from a well. And Iter, who is described as the Etruscan transcription of the Greek Hades, is sometimes depicted wearing the skin of a wolf. Etruscan amphoras, dated to circa 500 BC, also show images of priests making sacrifices at an altar, while dogs are depicted encircling the shrine, which is an image reminiscent of the origin story of the Hirpi Sorani. Some scholars have suggested a common origin shared between the ritual of the Hirpi Sorani and the Roman festival of Lupercalia, a name thought to originate from the Latin lupus, meaning wolf. Some of the rites were confined to the Lupercal cave, which according to legend is where Romulus and Remus were discovered and raised by a she-wolf. Goats and dogs were said to be sacrificed at the festival, and those partaking in the rites would cut up strips of the animal hides which were used to strike spectators, an act which was seen to bestow fertility. Varro and Ovid also tell us of the association of Lupercalia with purification. Quote, "The latter, as the same writers say, was called February, from the Dei Inferni, or gods of the lower world, because at that time expiatory sacrifices are made to them. But I think it was called February, rather from Dies Februatus, or Purification Day, because then the people are Februatur, or purified. That is, the old Palatine town girt with these flocks of people is passed around by the naked Luperci, or priests of the rites." End quote. Quote, "The fathers of Rome called purification Februa. Many things still indicate that meaning for the word. The high priest asks the king and the flamen for woolen cloths called Februa in the ancient tongue. When houses are cleansed, the roasted grain and salt the lictor receives are called by the same name. The same name too is given to the branch cut from a pure tree, whose leaves wreath the priest's holy brows. I've seen the priest's wife ask for Februa, and at her request she was given a branch of pine. In short, Anything used to purify our bodies had that title in the days of our hairy ancestors. The month is so called because the Luperci cleanse the earth with strips of purifying hide, or because the time is pure, having placated the dead when the days devoted to the departed are over. Our ancestors believed every sin and cause of evil could be erased by rites of purification. End quote. Before we wrap up our investigation into Suri, let us first address the Etruscan word that was used for the gods, which the National Etruscan Museum called Iser. Etruscan glossaries show a single deity is styled either Ace or Ice, while in the plural it is Aesar or Acer. One of the historical accounts which seemingly confirms this is the Lives of the 12 Caesars by Suetonius, a Roman historian writing in the early imperial era. In his account, he tells us how lightning had struck a statue of Augustus Caesar, who ordered the omen to be interpreted by seers. Quote, "At about the same time, the first letter of his name was melted from the inscription on one of his statues by a flash of lightning. It was interpreted to mean that he would live only 100 days from that time, the number indicated by the letter C, and that he would be numbered amongst the gods, since Aesar, that is the part of the name Caesar which was left, is the word for gods in the Etruscan tongue." End quote.